A 5-year-old girl burst into the rain-slicked alley where 5 men in tailored suits stood in silent conversation. Her desperate voice shattered the night. "Please. They're beating my mama." Ganyong turned slowly, his tattooed neck catching the neon glow from above. The child was trembling, soaked through, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one hand. "Who is hurting your mama, little one?" His voice was calm, controlled, the kind of calm that preceded storms. "Ramon," she gasped between sobs. "My mama's boyfriend. Him and his friends. They won't stop. There's so much blood." The 4 men behind Ganyong straightened. Hands moved instinctively toward concealed weapons. Their boss raised one finger, wait. He knelt on the wet pavement, bringing himself eye level with the child. Rain dripped from his slick-back hair. "Where?" She pointed a shaking finger toward the end of the alley. "The apartments. 3rd floor. The door with the broken lock." Even from here, they could hear it, muffled screaming, a crash of breaking glass, a woman's voice pleading in Spanish. "What is your name?" Ganyong asked, his hand gently steadying her shoulder. "Monica," she whispered, looking up at the imposing man with the dragon tattoo coiling up his throat. "I'm 5.5. Ganyong stood, his leather jacket creaking. He looked at his lieutenant and spoke 2 words in Korean. The men moved like shadows, pulling out phones, checking weapons. He looked back down at Monica, and something shifted in his dark eyes, something that hadn't stirred in years. "You are very brave, Monica." He removed his jacket and draped it over her small shoulders. "Stay with Mr. Kim. We are going to help your mama now." The tiger's claw had awakened. "Before we go any further, if stories like this move you the way they move me, make sure you subscribe. It helps these stories continue, and it tells me you want more." They moved through the rain like smoke, silent except for the rhythm of boots on wet concrete. Ganyong led, his jaw set, hands loose at his sides, a predator's casual readiness. Behind him, for shadows armed and purposeful. The building reeked of decay and neglect. Flickering lights. Graffiti-scarred walls. 3rd floor, east side. The door hung crooked on broken hinges, light bleeding into the hallway. Inside, glass shattered. A man laughed. A woman screamed. Ganyong didn't knock. The door exploded inward with a single kick. 5 men poured into chaos. Overturned furniture, blood on the walls, white powder scattered across a cracked coffee table. 4 men stood over a woman curled on the floor, her face swollen beyond recognition, dark hair matted with blood. Ramon spun around first, eyes wild with cocaine and rage. "Who the hell?" He never finished. Ganyong's fist connected with his jaw, a sound like a baseball bat hitting meat. Ramon staggered backward, crashing into the wall. The others moved to intervene. They shouldn't have. Ganyong's men were efficient, brutal, trained. One of Ramon's friends went down with a knee to the gut. Another crumpled as a pistol cracked across his skull. The 3rd tried to pull a knife. It was on the floor, along with 2 of his teeth, before he could blink. But Ramon was quick. Desperate. He scrambled through the chaos, grabbed a beer bottle, hurled it at the nearest man, and dove through the apartment's back window in an explosion of glass. "Go!" Ganyong barked in Korean. 2 men pursued, but the fire escape groaned and creaked as Ramon's footsteps faded into the night. "Gone. For now." Ganyong turned to the woman. She was barely breathing, each gasp wet and rattling. Broken ribs, maybe worse. He knelt beside her, surprisingly gentle for hands that had just dispensed violence. "Lydia," he said quietly. "Monica sent us." Her swollen eyes cracked open. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak sob. "Get the car," Ganyong ordered. "Hospital. Now. Clean route, no police." His lieutenant hesitated. "Boss, this much heat." "I said now." The men moved quickly, zip-tying Ramon's groaning friends, wiping surfaces, collecting shell casings. Professionals cleaning a crime scene with terrifying precision. Ganyong lifted Lydia carefully, cradling her broken body as if she were made of glass. Blood soaked into his white shirt. He didn't care. As they carried her down the stairs, he thought of Monica's face in that alley. 5 years old, soaking wet, terrified but brave enough to run into the dark looking for help. Ramon had escaped tonight. That was a mistake he would only make once. If you're still here, thank you, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the rest of stories like this. The black sedan cut through rain-slick streets, no sirens, no lights. In the back seat, Lydia's labored breathing was the only sound. Ganyong kept pressure on her ribs with a folded jacket, watching her pale face for signs she might slip away. St. Vincent's, he said. Private wing. Dr. Chen owes us. The driver nodded. Everyone owed the Tiger's Claw something. Back at the apartment, the cleanup crew worked with surgical precision. Spent casings disappeared into plastic bags. Blood was scrubbed with bleach. Ramon's friends were loaded into a van still zip-tied, destined for a warehouse interrogation that would yield Ramon's hiding places, or at least everyone he knew. The neighbors had heard nothing. They never did in buildings like this. By the time the sedan pulled into St. Vincent's private entrance, Dr. Chen was already waiting with a gurney and 2 nurses who asked no questions. Lydia was whisked away through sterile white corridors, leaving Ganyong standing in the fluorescent glare, blood drying on his shirt. His lieutenant, Minjun, approached with a phone. Boss. The girl. She's still with Kim? Yes. In the car 2 blocks out. She's asking for her mother. Ganyong's jaw tightened. He'd dealt with cartels, corrupt politicians, and rival syndicates. A 5-year-old's fear was somehow harder. Bring her here. Keep her away from the ER. And Minjun, he turned, his eyes flat and cold. I want Monica protected. Legally. No foster system, no social services. She stays with us until her mother recovers. Minjun blinked. Boss, that requires. I know what it requires. Call Judge Park. Remind him about the election contributions. Remind him about the photographs. Get emergency temporary custody papers drawn up by morning. Use whatever name we need. The lawyer? Song. She's dirty enough to make it work, smart enough to make it clean. Ganyong glanced down the hallway where they'd taken Lydia. Tell her to create a paper trail showing I'm a family friend. Fabricate whatever history is necessary. Monica Hernandez does not enter the system. Understood? Yes, boss. And Minjun. Find Ramon. I don't care if you burn down half the city. Find him. The lieutenant bowed slightly and disappeared, already dialing. Ganyong stood alone in the hallway, a man who commanded empires built on fear and money, now planning to become a temporary guardian to a little girl who'd interrupted his business meeting with a plea for help. His phone buzzed. A photo from Kim, Monica asleep in the car, wrapped in Ganyong's leather jacket, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. Something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. Not quite redemption. Not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. Take a breath, and if you haven't already, subscribe. It helps keep these stories alive. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the Meridian Tower. Glass, steel, and money stretched 40 stories above the city's filth. Monica stood in the entrance, small and impossibly out of place, still wearing her stained pink jacket and clutching her rabbit. Ganyong watched her take it in. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering skyline, marble floors polished to mirrors, modern art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Everything sharp angles and cold surfaces. No warmth. No life. A fortress, not a home. You'll stay in the guest room, he said, his voice softer than he intended. 2nd floor. There's a bathroom attached. Monica nodded silently, eyes wide. He'd had one of his men buy children's clothes, toys, books. Things he had no reference for. They sat in shopping bags by the leather sofa, tags still attached. He gestured toward them awkwardly. Those are for you. She approached the bags slowly, pulled out a coloring book and a box of crayons. Her fingers traced the cover, a garden scene with butterflies and flowers. Nothing like the world she'd just escaped. When can I see Mama? Her voice was so small. Soon. She needs to rest. The doctors are helping her. Monica sat on the floor, opened the coloring book, and began to draw. Ganyong stood there, uncertain. He could negotiate million-dollar arms deals without flinching, could order a man's death with a single phone call. But this child, sitting cross-legged on his expensive rug, left him paralyzed. He retreated to his office, made calls, checked reports on Ramon's whereabouts. Nothing yet. The man had vanished like smoke. It wouldn't last. An hour passed. Then 2. When he returned to the living room, Monica was asleep on the sofa, the coloring book open beside her. She'd drawn a picture, crude crayon work, the way 5-year-olds draw. A tall man with dark hair standing next to a small girl. They were holding hands. Above them, a yellow sun and the words "thank you" in wobbly letters. Ganyong picked up the paper carefully, as if it might crumble. He'd ordered executions, destroyed lives, built an empire on fear and violence. He was stained with blood that would never wash clean. And here was this child, thanking him with crayons and stick figures, seeing something in him that probably didn't exist. the burden of her innocence pressed against his chest like a physical weight. He carried Monica to the guest room, tucked her in without waking her, left the rabbit within reach. In the doorway, he paused, looking back at the small form under expensive sheets. Downstairs, his phone buzzed. Min-jun, found Ramon's cousin. He's talking. Ganyong's expression hardened. He closed Monica's door gently and descended into the darkness where he belonged. If this chapter touched something in you, tap subscribe. There's so much more ahead. 3 days of hunting had yielded nothing but dead ends and bodies. Ramon's cousin had talked before he stopped breathing, but the information was worthless. Safe houses already abandoned, contacts who claimed ignorance. Ramon knew how to disappear. But desperation makes men stupid. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Dr. Chun, his voice tight with fear. Mr. Gon, there's been an incident. Ganyong was already moving, pulling on his jacket. What incident? Lydia Hernandez. She's gone. Taken from her room 20 minutes ago. We found Jae-sung in the stairwell. He's alive, but barely. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, blunt force trauma to the head. The phone cracked in Ganyong's grip. Security footage? 3 men. Masks. They knew the layout, knew which cameras to avoid. Professional enough. Chin paused. They left something in her room. Ganyong was in the car before Chin finished the sentence, Min-jun driving, 2 more vehicles following. The city blurred past, rain streaking the windows like tears. St. Vincent's private wing was controlled chaos when they arrived. Nurses hovering, security scrambling, police asking questions that would be answered with convenient lies. Ganyong moved through them like a ghost, straight to Lydia's room. The bed was empty, sheets twisted and bloodstained from where they'd ripped out her 4. On the wall above the headboard, written in her blood, 6 words in crude letters. You took mine. I took yours. Beneath it, a Polaroid picture taped to the wall. Lydia, unconscious, zip-tied in what looked like a basement. Very much alive. Very much bait. Min-jun appeared at his shoulder. Boss, Jae-sung is conscious. He says there were 4 of them, not 3. Ramon was there. He saw his face before. Find him. Ganyong's voice was ice. Every informant, every dealer, every rat in this city. Find him. I don't care what it costs. Sir, the police. Will find nothing. Make it disappear. All of it. He turned to Min-jun, and something terrible lived in his eyes. Ramon wanted war. He's going to get extinction. Back at the penthouse, Monica was still sleeping, unaware her mother had been stolen from a guarded hospital room. Ganyong stood in his office overlooking the city, hands braced against the window, watching dawn break over the skyline. He'd underestimated Ramon. Treated him like a common dealer, a coward who'd run at the first sign of real danger. But wounded animals were the most dangerous. Cornered men had nothing to lose. His phone lit up. A text from an unknown number. Just an address and 4 words. Come alone. She dies. Ganyong smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Ramon had just made his last mistake. The city knew when the tiger's claw was hunting. Within an hour of receiving the text, Ganyong's network erupted into motion like a hive disturbed. Every street corner, every dark bar, every warehouse and backroom operation, all of it suddenly belonged to him. Phones rang in the dead of night. Doors were kicked open. Money changed hands, and when money wasn't enough, fear did the rest. In a basement across town, Junho sat hunched over 3 laptops, fingers flying across keyboards. Traffic cameras, ATM surveillance, private security feeds. He cracked them all, rewinding footage, tracking vehicles, faces, patterns. Every digital eye in the city was now Ganyong's to command. Got something, Junho said, not looking up. White van, stolen plates. Caught it on a bodega camera near the hospital, headed south toward the industrial district. Ganyong leaned over his shoulder, memorizing the image. Timestamp. 43 minutes after the extraction. Send it to everyone. I want every inch of that district turned inside out. The order rippled outward. In smoky gambling dens, at shipping docks, in late-night diners where deals were made, the word spread. The boss was hunting. Show your loyalty or pray he doesn't remember your face. Street dealers abandoned corners mid-transaction. Informants crawled out from under rocks, desperate to offer something useful. Even rival operations went quiet, not wanting to draw attention while the tiger's claw stalked. Min-jun coordinated from the war room. Ganyong's office transformed into tactical command. Maps spread across the desk, phones ringing constantly, men reporting in with fragments of information. A mechanic who'd seen the van. A homeless man who remembered voices speaking Spanish near the old cannery. A prostitute who'd served Ramon's crew last month at a motel near the docks. Piece by piece, the picture emerged. "Boss," Minjun said, pressing a phone to his chest. "We've got 3 possible locations. Abandoned cannery on Pier 47. Condemned apartment complex on Riverside. Old factory on. All of them." Ganyong's voice cut like a blade. "I want teams on all 3. Simultaneously. No communication once they're in position. I don't want Ramon getting a warning from a lookout." He pulled on his shoulder holster, checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. The rage that had been simmering since the hospital now burned cold and controlled. This wasn't anger anymore. This was calculation. Surgery with a scalpel. "What about the police?" someone asked. Ganyong didn't even look up. "Captain Morrison has been paid enough to be conveniently investigating a warehouse fire across town tonight. We have 4 hours before he needs to be seen responding to something." The men moved like clockwork, years of criminal efficiency compressed into minutes. Vehicles loaded. Weapons distributed. Routes planned. Ganyong stood at the window one last time, watching the city sprawl below. Somewhere down there, Ramon was waiting with Lydia. Waiting to spring his trap. Thinking he'd cornered the tiger. He had no idea he'd just awakened the dragon. The cannery on Pier 47 squatted against the waterfront like a rotting corpse, windows shattered, walls streaked with rust and decades of neglect. The smell of brine and decay hung thick in the air. Perfect place to hide. Perfect place to die. Ganyong approached from the south with Minjun and 3 others, moving through shadows cast by sodium lights. 2 more teams circled from the east and north. No sirens. No backup. Just the tiger's claw and the mathematics of violence. A lookout died silently near the loading dock, Minjun's knife finding throat before the man could breathe. They dragged him behind a dumpster and kept moving. The main entrance hung open, rusted chains cut recently. Fresh footprints in the dust. Inside, the cannery stretched into darkness, conveyor belts frozen mid-operation, massive vats corroded and listing, catwalks crisscrossing overhead like metal spiderwebs. And in the center, under a single work lamp, Lydia sat bound to a chair. Her face was swollen, crusted blood dark against her skin. But alive. Conscious. Terrified. Ramon stood behind her, one hand gripping her hair, the other pressing a gun to her temple. 3 men flanked him, weapons drawn, eyes darting toward every shadow. "I knew you'd come." Ramon's voice echoed through the empty space, cocaine-bright and fraying at the edges. The great Ganyong. Too predictable. Too proud. Ganyong stepped into the light, hands loose at his sides. Behind him, his men materialized from darkness like ghosts, weapons trained. On the catwalks above, red laser dots appeared on Ramon's crew. "Let her go," Ganyong said. His voice carried no anger. Just certainty. "Or what? You'll kill me?" Ramon laughed, high and unhinged. He pressed the gun harder against Lydia's head. She whimpered. "I'm already dead. You made sure of that when you broke into my place. When you humiliated me. You were beating a woman. My woman. My business." Spittle flew from Ramon's mouth. "You think you're better than me? You're a goddamn criminal. A gangster. You've killed more people than I've ever met." "True." Ganyong took a step forward. "But I don't beat women. I don't terrorize children. And I don't leave witnesses." The shot came from above, a whisper, a breath. The bullet passed so close to Ramon's ear he felt the heat. His man to the left dropped, red mist where his head had been. Chaos erupted. Ramon's remaining 2 dove for cover, firing wild. Minjun moved like water, 3 shots, chest, head. Both down before they hit concrete. Ramon swung his gun toward Ganyong, but his hand was shaking, his aim worthless. The shot went wide, sparking off a metal beam. Ganyong closed the distance in 3 strides, caught Ramon's wrist, twisted. Bones snapped like kindling. The gun clattered away. Ramon screamed, swung with his other hand, desperate, sloppy. Ganyong caught that too. Broke it the same way. Ramon collapsed, cradling his ruined hands, sobbing. Please, I'm sorry. You should have kept running." Ganyong knelt beside him, voice soft as death. "You should have disappeared. But you came back for revenge. For pride." He stood, nodded to Minjun. "Make it clean. Make it permanent. No body." Minjun stepped forward. Ramon's screaming cut off abruptly with a single shot. Ganyong was already moving to Lydia, cutting her bonds, catching her as she collapsed into his arms. "Monica," she whispered through cracked lips. "Safe," he promised. "You're both safe now." The silence after the storm was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the black sedan and the distant, muffled sirens that Ganyong's men were already rerouting. Ramon's final mistake had been corrected with brutal efficiency, leaving behind no witnesses, no physical evidence, and a final, permanent gap in the city's low-level criminal structure. The address sent to Ganyong's phone had been a crumbling warehouse, an easy trap for anyone less prepared. He had gone in alone as requested, but his shadows, Minjun and the rest of the Tiger's Claw, had been the air he breathed, their movements invisible, their presence overwhelming. Lydia was recovered from the basement, pale and barely conscious but alive, the ligature marks from the zip ties already fading. Ganyong had carried her out himself, a heavy, silent promise settling over him that no one would ever touch her or Monica again. Now, the legal cleanup began. Judge Park, reminded of past favors and compromising photographs, moved with immediate, unquestioning compliance. Lawyer Song, sharp and morally flexible, fabricated a deep, convincing paper trail. Ganyong was a lifelong, discreet family friend, offering refuge to the little girl and her mother during a time of crisis. The police, who found only the aftermath of a shootout between rival dealers and zero evidence linking the scene to the Tiger's Claw, quickly closed the case. The system, corrupted by Ganyong's wealth and influence, became the fortress protecting the two women in the penthouse. Monica woke to the sterile white sheets of the guest room, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. She did not know the cost of her safety. Ganyong watched her from the doorway, a small, innocent sovereign in his cold, glittering empire. Lydia, resting in St. Vincent's private wing under the watchful eye of Dr. Chun, was equally secure, no longer a victim but a valuable piece of his complicated, protected territory. The debt was paid. The Tiger's Claw had awakened not for violence, but for protection, and it would not rest again. The sterile white corridors of St. Vincent's private wing became Lydia's sanctuary, a place where the Tiger's Claw's influence provided an impenetrable shield against the world. Under Dr. Chen's discreet care, the broken ribs mended, the deep contusions faded, and the fear in her eyes began to recede. Ganyong never visited her room, but his presence was absolute. He sent Minjun with instructions, flowers, and updates on Monica, ensuring she understood the permanence of their protection. Lydia, a woman who had spent her life trying to survive a corrupt system, realized the irony. The most dangerous man she'd ever met was the one offering her only chance at true safety months past. The legal paperwork was complete, a flawless fabrication created by lawyer Song, cementing Ganyong as the family friend who had stepped in. He arranged for their relocation far from the city, a quiet suburban town where the air was clean and the neighbors asked no questions. A new house, not a fortress like his penthouse, but a warm, modest home with a garden where Monica could draw butterflies that actually existed. New names, new IDs, and a trust fund managed by Minjun, ensuring financial stability they'd never dreamed of. The day came for their departure. Ganyong met them at the entrance of the hospital's private wing. Lydia stood taller now, dressed in clean, new clothes, the matted blood replaced by a calm resolve. She offered him a silent, profound nod of gratitude, the only payment he would accept. Then came Monica. She was 5.5 no longer, having just turned 6, and she walked toward the imposing man in the tailored suit, clutching her eternal stuffed rabbit. She wasn't terrified anymore. She was simply a little girl saying goodbye to the man who saved her life. She dropped the rabbit and wrapped her small arms tightly around his legs. Ganyong froze, caught off guard by the sheer, innocent force of the hug. He knelt, his hand gently settling on her shoulder, the same gesture he used in the rain-slicked alley. "Be brave, Monica," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You have a new start now." Monica looked up at the man with the coiled dragon tattoo, the man who commanded empires, and smiled. "Thank you, Uncle Yong," she whispered, a new name for the protector who carried the burden of her innocence. She picked up her rabbit and walked toward her mother, stepping out of the darkness and into the dawn. Ganyong watched the black sedan drive away, leaving him alone in the sterile glare, a man forever changed by a crayon drawing and a 5-year-old's plea. Years dissolved into a silent, guarded routine. The suburban house, quiet and unremarkable, became the center of a security operation more sophisticated than any cartel defense. Ganyong never appeared, but his shadow, the omnipresent network of the Tiger's Claw, was an invisible membrane around their lives. Minjun was the conduit, managing the finances, ensuring the protection details were seamless, and fielding the occasional short phone call from Ganyong, who demanded only two things. Are they safe? And are they happy? The answers were always affirmative. Lydia thrived, working a quiet job, attending college classes part-time, no longer defined by trauma, but by potential. Monica grew. She lost the wobbly letters and crude stick figures of her 5-year-old art, replacing them with sharp, vibrant paintings that filled the new house with life and color. She was a bright student, an engaging child, a testament to the safe, stable world Ganyong had bought for her. She knew Uncle Yong was a distant, powerful friend who helped her mama, and she wrote him letters sometimes, describing school projects or holidays, which Minjun delivered to the penthouse. In the silent glass and steel expanse of the Meridian Tower, Ganyong remained the cold, focused apex of his empire. The cartels still feared him, the politicians still obeyed him, and the rival syndicates still moved with caution beneath the tiger's claw. He had expanded his power, his wealth, and his global reach, yet the victories tasted like ash. Power was a means, not an end point. One evening, alone in his office overlooking the glittering, conquered city, Ganyong opened the drawer of his mahogany desk. Inside, beneath contracts worth millions and dossiers detailing human vulnerabilities, was a single sheet of paper. It was brittle now, stained slightly with what might have been dried rain or old coffee. The crude crayon drawing, a tall, dark-haired man holding hands with a small girl, beneath a yellow sun. Below it, the wobbly, hopeful words. Thank you, he traced the wobbly letters with a finger. He had built his life on fear and violence, his soul stained with blood that could never wash clean. Yet this simple drawing, this act of innocence, had given him a new, impossible duty. It was the burden of her innocence that now held his empire together, a purpose stronger than power, more sacred than any contract. He was not redeemed, not entirely, but he was bound. He placed the picture back and closed the drawer, the watch continuing, eternal and unwavering.